the aliens are in charge of providing those new bodies. You want to see yours, Pat, they said. So this was wonderful. Pat is now assured that when the resurrection comes, she's got the vehicle for it. Lisa, on the other hand, down in Alabama, was told that the cloned copy of her body could be used in a very threatening manner. In effect, that it could be used to replace her if she didn't cooperate with the alien program, and that no one would know the difference. Not quite the same story as the resurrection. I would point out that such an implication of threat and replacement was also made to Ted Rice during an abduction when he was a young teenager, and there were several other teenagers abducted with him at that time, and cloned replacement threats were made also at that point. So these are the 3 points that I really wanted to make briefly this morning before I do the presentation of the video with illustrations from the women in Taken. And like a good English teacher, I'm supposed to summarize what I've said, and I'm going to do that right now. For you to consider 3 points, hopefully. First, our own human authorities are seriously concerned about and involved with some aspects of the alien abduction agenda. If they take it seriously, it would behoove us to do likewise. And also, when human agencies are involved, there has to be some sort of trail of events. And I think thus a very strong possibility exists for some intrepid researchers to get out there and uncover and follow this trail. There has to be a record of human involvement. Second, much of this agenda clearly has a physical focus that should raise some very strong questions about some of the alien claims to be here on a primarily spiritual mission. The implication of both the implants and the reports of the cloned bodies are so potentially explosive that a great deal of effort toward investigating these allegations is certainly called for if we're really serious about wanting to understand the motivations of these entities and the purposes of their contacts with us. And third, I think we need to recognize that deceptions are employed at almost every level of this interaction to keep abductees from knowing about the actual events and the actual entities involved in these encounters. To me, maybe I'm just a suspicious sort, this implies that there's something they don't want us to know about. And often what seems implied from the reports is that there is something within us, the humans, something of which we could be capable, something of resistance or altering of this scenario that the abductors absolutely do not want us to be aware of. They go to great lengths to program our thinking about our encounters with them, that we are subordinate, that we are helpless, or that we are dependent, or that we belong to them. The list goes on. And they go to a great deal of trouble to convince us in every way that they can that we can do nothing about controlling these situations. The good news is that in a number of cases in the past couple of years, that hasn't proven to be true. Abductees are finding more and more specific instances in which they are able to resist the illusion suggestions, in which they are able to say no to procedures, and in fact when they have been able to break free of actual controls. This to me is a great step forward, and I think it's going to be something growing with any luck. We're going to find abductees are realizing there are ways to change this entire pattern of activity. The fact that in several people's encounters during the past few years they've managed to see or perceive more than the abductees wanted is probably the most positive sign I have to report to you today. Also, as a species, our ability to perceive the energies and the presence of these entities, I think, may be increasing. Maybe it's thanks to a number of possible influences. I'm not really trying to make a claim for where this increased perceptive ability may be coming from, but I think it's probably part of the accounting for the massive awakening to this phenomenon that you and I and our generation has witnessed, especially in the last decade. If these encounters have been a hidden part of humanity's reality for a long time, as such some researchers believe and present evidence for, then don't you think that the fairly recent explosion of contact reports is some kind of proof that things are not business as usual in this abduction game right now? Something is changing. But without an understanding of the screens and the virtual reality capabilities, however, we are left with only alien-created illusions to assess and act upon. And I think that keeps us from any real useful responses to the situations occurring in our lives and so many other people's lives today. Only a fool would ignore the transitional state of events and ideas and beliefs in the time in which we're living right now, and I don't think any of us here are fools. All of these things that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk this morning are polarizing our society at an alarming rate, and we have no idea right now really of the direction things are going to go in the future. And that's in the general society. Within ufology, theories abound and arguments rage over especially the abduction controversy. And you know, sometimes it's reached such extremes that I feel very confident this morning in predicting that we won't have the answer anytime soon if this keeps up. We should be admonished to get past the differences and start working on the similarities and the shared interests that we all have in this field. But we do have some answers, at least. Some start toward answers anyway. For instance, we know abductions are real. We know that the abducting agenda includes very physically oriented goals. We know that the abductors contradict themselves and often give false information, as well as information we don't have any way of testing. We know they are capable of masterful illusions. We know that they always take control of us during encounters, which to me is a sign that they fear an unfettered Homo sapien. And we know that our government knows about this situation and is actively involved to the level of carrying out covert and illegal actions against its own citizenry. No matter what the truth ultimately proves to be, we have to go for it. I mean, without it, we're like children playing with shadows. And we're ignorant, and we're certainly unempowered to deal with and confront whatever the real entities are behind this masquerade. To take it all at face value is foolish. To take none of it at face value is ridiculous. Investigations into this field there cannot be anything more important for us to be doing right now than to dig past our wishes, dig past our fears, and dig for objective reality and understanding. Well, that's the sermon for this morning, folks. What I'd like to do with the rest of my time is to show you and make brief commentary on some of the illustrations and photographs from the women in Taken, and I'll ask the gang over there in the corner to start the video. And before you do, Craig, just a moment. Most of the video is of slides, of photos and drawings. At the very end of this, however, is an excerpt from a videotape one of the women in Taken made when she was having extreme military aircraft activity over her rural cattle ranch in Tennessee. And I might point out that mysterious deaths and cattle mutilations on that area during this time corresponded to those in Alabama that Linda has made us all familiar with, and none of which were explained. Even when there were no mutilations, the dead cattle were simply, all they could find was unknown toxicology, and it led in a year's time to a loss of $11,000 worth of cattle. So this is something pretty big for the family involved here. So there will be a little bit of video at the end of this. So Craig, let's go for it. This is the farmhouse in Indiana in 1954, Pat and her siblings and her mom. This is where the aliens abducted the family, and then the next morning the military came and sequestered them. This is the only drawing that Pat has made of later experiences. She called that little device the soul machine, and she sat on it and ran her hands over those little holes of different colored light, and she heard a sound they told her was the sound of her soul. I'd love to hear about other reports similar to this if any of you know of them. This was also in the facility where she was shown the cloned body. This is Polly's drawing of some of the bulbous, wrinkled-headed aliens. She said they almost posed for her to get this conscious memory. You know how often they don't give you very much to take back consciously. And this kind of alien description has turned up in other people's reports. We'll see one more in here, in fact, in a little bit. From Lisa, here's one of her. She says, "I'm no artist. Don't tell me I am, because I know I'm not." And I think she did great for being no artist to show the hooded figures. These are less frequently reported, but this one she was able actually to see some facial features where very often the hood completely obscures them. This is Lisa's drawing of another of the bulbous-headed entities, sort of similar to what we saw with Polly's drawing earlier. And these have been reported in a number of other cases as well. Not your typical gray or reptoid or insectoid, but something seeming to have more of a porpoise-type bulbous forehead. A typical gray in a hat, right? And this happens. I remember seeing one myself when I was quite young. She said this was surprising because its mouth would open, and we have a few cases where the little slit has actually opened. So just one of Lisa's representations. This one, she says, is very similar to a figure in Linda Howe's latest book with the flat, ridged nose area. This entity, she's not real fond of at all, was involved in what she said was one of the rape scenarios she was put through. Let's see what's coming up next. Lisa's drawing of the reptilian entity that was very aggressive sexually with her as well. And again, she says, please remember, she's no artist, but it was a brown, scaly, hard exterior with the slit eyes, vertically slit eyes, and clawed appendages or fingers. And a very robust entity. Symbols that she has seen in these, and this is so typical. I mean, we could flash symbols, and so many of them are some version of the triangle and the circle. We'll see another variety of this kind of symbol a little bit later with Angie's drawings. From Anita in Texas, this is a drawing of what she called the tan ones, and she makes a very big distinction between the tans and the grays. She said the grays could care less about us. They're very official or impersonal, but the tans seemed to go to a great deal of trouble to make her want to love them and to elicit love from her. She remembered at one point patting it on the face and saying, too bad it's not real. This is the drawing from Anita's granddaughter who lives with her of what she said were the mushroom men who had come into her room one night. These, however, she said were no more than maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. And you note the drawing details that she is included in 4 fingers and so on. Here's Beth's drawing in Puerto Rico of one of the doctors on board who dealt with her and her entire family in 1978 when they had a massive abduction. Jorge Martinez investigated a lot of this case, but it's only been reported in Spanish so far, so, except for what we haven't taken. Widow peak hairline, very typical reported humanoids. When Beth recalled being taken by the military to a desert area where there was an above-ground compound area, much like what Ted described, being then taken again underground through this adobe or old-type structure into a room with military where she said 2 men in astronaut suits made a presentation here in this underground room to her and a number of other military people who had her there. And she was there not by invitation but by duress. So very similar to what Ted had remembered from the mid-'80s event in Albuquerque. We don't know where these facilities might be, but you know, Kirtland's not that far away. One of Jane, also one of the women in Taken from Texas, one of the photographs of a UFO, Jane's entire scenario began with a number of overflights of UFOs witnessed by neighbors and relatives, and she was instructed on this day to clean her camera, get new film, and go out. They were going to be there. And this is one of the shots. Some of the body marks that we've talked about so many times, the triangle of punctures on Jane's arm, are typical of what most of us have had recurrently. Let's see if we can go on to some other physical marks, I believe, here. We'll see a little bit later, if not right now. I can't remember the order of these things. Yeah, this scoop mark on Jane's leg. Now there are some scoop mark reports that we've had, including one in the family, where after the scoop begins to heal, a waxy grayish substance oozes out of this for a while, and then it heals up to the regular scoop mark that we know, and this is one instance of that happening with Jane. Jane's drawing of a memory of being before this council of long-haired, light entities. She cannot recall what they were telling her, however, but this was the best she could do to capture the feel of these faceless entities. And again, this is often a similar situation reported by other people, including one other in the book Taken, Amy. An unusual scenario, Jane recalled only snatches of an encounter in which she saw robed aliens at work in one of the facilities, and she heard them listing certain places in the Texas, Louisiana area by name, certain towns and locations, and then the words activate, activate, activate.